The morning air outside the mansion was cold enough to sting, yet Imani's palms were sweating. She stood barefoot on the marble porch, eyes fixed on the tall iron gates opening slowly. Moments later, a black car rolled in and out stepped her boss, billionaire Ethan Cole, suitcase in one hand, white lilies in the other, smiling like a man returning to love. "Imani," he said, surprised. "What on earth? Why are you out here this early?" Her voice trembled, breath sharp with panic. "Mr. Cole, please don't go inside." Ethan blinked, confused. "What? It's my house." "Please, sir," she whispered, stepping forward. "Not right now. Not today. I'm begging you." He frowned. "Is there a gas leak? Fire? What is this?" She shook her head violently. "No, sir. It's what's upstairs. You don't want to see it. You don't deserve to see it." The lilies quivered in his grip. "You're scaring me, Imani. Where's Madison?" Her lips trembled at the name. She's upstairs, but then move aside." His voice sharpened, impatient. The tone of a man used to obedience. But she didn't move. Tears welled in her eyes as she dropped her knees on the cold porch tiles, clutching his leg. "Please, sir, I'm on my knees in your doorway. Don't go up there. I ain't crazy. I'm trying to protect you." Ethan froze, heart thudding in his chest. He'd known this woman for 3 years. Quiet, loyal, respectful. Never once had she raised her voice. Now she was trembling, sobbing, begging him like his life depended on it. "Imani," he whispered, lost between anger and dread. "What could possibly be pain?" she said softly. "That's what's waiting for you up there." The wind caught the lilies and sent one tumbling down the steps as silence fell heavy between them. Ethan looked toward the door and took his first step toward the truth that would break everything. If it's already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. 3 days earlier, the Cole mansion had been a world of quiet perfection. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, polishing every inch of marble and glass to a mirror shine. Imani moved carefully through the halls, her soft footsteps swallowed by the silence of wealth. She'd been working here for 3 years, cleaning, managing deliveries, making sure every room stayed spotless for Madison Cole, Ethan's elegant wife. It paid well, but what mattered more was respect. Ethan had always treated her kindly, never once talking down to her. But Madison, her smiles were sharp as crystal. That morning, Madison had called her into the bedroom. "Imani," she said, sipping coffee like it was champagne. "The master bathroom mirror has streaks again. I can see them." Imani folded her hands, steady voice hiding the ache. "Yes, ma'am. I'll fix it right away." Madison's lips curved. "You always do." The words carried that thin, cutting edge, the kind that reminded Imani where she stood. Still, Imani kept her head down. She learned long ago that quiet strength survived where pride couldn't. Every dollar she earned helped her younger brother finish college back in Georgia. So she smiled through insults, worked late, and stayed silent when she heard strange footsteps upstairs after midnight. One evening, while cleaning the foyer, she heard laughter drifting down the staircase. Madison's laughter, soft and breathless, and then a man's voice, low and familiar, not Mr. Cole's. Her hand froze around the feathered duster. She turned off the vacuum, heart pounding. Footsteps thudded down the hall. She ducked behind the corner just as Madison's perfume filled the air, sweet, heavy, guilt-scented. Then she saw him, a man in a tailored suit leaving the guest room, buttoning his shirt. She recognized him instantly. Mr. Cole's best friend, Brandon. Imani's heart sank. In that moment, she knew she'd seen something she was never supposed to see. And if Ethan ever found out, his whole world would come apart. She wanted to tell him, but Madison's cold voice stopped her the next morning. "You didn't see anything, did you, Imani?" Her smile was poison. "Because if you did, you'd be out of a job before noon." Imani lowered her eyes. "No, ma'am." But inside, a storm had already begun. The day Ethan returned from his San Francisco trip began like any other, quiet, polished, perfect. The scent of vanilla candles floated through the hallway. The piano in the living room gleamed under morning light. Imani stood by the front door, pretending to arrange the flowers, her hands shaking so badly she could barely keep the vase steady. She thought about calling in sick, thought about leaving a note and never coming back. But something in her heart told her she couldn't run from what was coming. And now it was too late. The sound of tires on gravel snapped her out of her thoughts. She rushed outside, and there he was, stepping out of the car, suitcase in one hand, white lilies in the other, a smile on his face, a man still believing his world was safe. She couldn't let him walk into that lie. "Mr. Cole," she called, voice breaking. "Please don't go upstairs." But he did what men like him always did, trusted logic over instinct, pride over warning. "Imani, stop this nonsense," he said, brushing past her. "If something's wrong, I'll handle it." "Sir, please." She grabbed his arm. "You don't understand. What's up there, it'll break you." He froze, eyes narrowing. "Break me?" he repeated. "What are you talking about?" When she didn't answer, he yanked free, breath sharp. "Enough. I don't know what's gotten into you, but I'm going to see my wife." She tried again, one last time, her voice small, desperate. "Then let me go first. Let me walk those stairs before you do." But he was already gone, footsteps echoing up the marble staircase. Imani stood frozen, her heart racing so loud she couldn't even hear her own prayers. And then she heard it, a single sound that tore the morning open. A gasp, a crash, silence. By the time she reached the doorway, her knees buckled. The bouquet of lilies lay scattered on the floor beside Ethan's hand. Madison stood by the bed, wrapped in a sheet, eyes wide with panic. Beside her, Brandon, the best friend, half-dressed, face drained of blood. "Ethan!" Imani screamed, rushing to the floor, her knees hitting the carpet. His chest heaved once, then went still. She pressed her ear to his heart, trembling hand shaking his shoulder. "Sir, please, don't do this. Don't leave like this." Madison tried to speak. "I can explain." Imani's voice exploded, sharp as thunder. "Don't you say a word." She grabbed the phone, dialing 911 through tears. "It's my boss," she gasped. "He collapsed. Please hurry." As she pressed her hand against his chest, she whispered through sobs, "Hold on, sir. You ain't going out like this. Not for her. Not today." The sirens wailed outside minutes later, but for Imani, time had already stopped. All she could see was a good man's world collapsing under the weight of betrayal, and her own heart breaking beside his. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. The hospital lights were too bright, the kind that make pain feel permanent. Machines beeped softly in rhythm with Ethan's shallow breaths. He lay pale and still beneath white sheets, an oxygen mask covering half his face. Imani hadn't moved in hours. Her elbow was still wrapped in a thin bandage from the fall on the porch. But she didn't care. When the doctor finally spoke, his words were half a relief, half a wound. "He's stable for now. It was emotional shock. He just needs rest." Imani nodded slowly, voice low. "He'll get that. I'll make sure." But peace didn't last long. The sound of heels clicked against the hospital floor, sharp, expensive, unapologetic. Madison walked in, perfectly dressed, hair brushed, perfume drowning out guilt. She looked at Imani like she was a smudge on the floor. "I'm his wife," she said coldly. "Move aside." Imani didn't move. "He don't need noise right now. He needs peace." "You don't get to decide that," Madison snapped. "You're just a help." Imani turned her head, eyes calm but burning. "And you're the reason he's lying here fighting for his life." Madison flinched, her face cracking for the first time. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "Mistake is burning breakfast," Imani said, voice steady as stone. "You made a choice." The words landed like a slap. The nurse by the door froze, pretending not to hear. Madison's lips trembled. "You think you're better than me?" Imani leaned closer. "No, ma'am. I just ain't got a heart full of lies." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan stirred weakly, his eyes fluttering open. "Imani!" She rushed to his side. "I'm right here, sir. You're safe now." Madison reached forward, tears rising. "Ethan, please." He looked at her once, then turned his face away. "Don't," he whispered. "Not right now." The air between them fractured. For the first time, the billionaire and his maid weren't divided by status, only by truth. Madison took a step back, her voice small. "I never meant." Imani's tone was quiet but final. "You meant every minute. You just didn't think truth would catch up." Madison's eyes filled, but no tears fell. She turned and walked out, heels echoing down the sterile hall. Ethan closed his eyes again, whispering, "Thank you, Imani." She shook her head, tears falling at last. "Don't thank me, sir. Just live. That'll be thanks enough." For the first time since that morning, the room felt calm. Not healed, not yet, but no longer poisoned by lies. The next morning, the hospital smelled like bleach and stale coffee. Imani sat in the same chair she'd been in all night, hands clasped tight, whispering prayers that faded into the soft hum of machines. Ethan slept, breathing steady now, but the world outside his room had already started to close in. Two men in dark suits walked in quietly. Lawyers. They didn't introduce themselves, just flashed polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Mrs. Cole has retained counsel," one said. "She claims emotional distress from the scene yesterday." Imani looked up slowly. "Distress?" The man cleared his throat. "She insists you assaulted her and interfere with family matters." For a second, Imani just stared. Then she let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. "I was trying to keep that man alive," she said. "That's all I did." The lawyer's tone stayed smooth, professional. "We're not here to accuse, ma'am, but you should know, if this becomes public, things could get complicated for you." She straightened her back. "You mean complicated for her?" "Mrs. Cole's family is influential. It would be better for everyone if you stayed quiet." Imani's jaw tightened. "You tell her I've been quiet all my life." That silence almost killed him. "I ain't doing that again." The men exchanged glances. "Then I'm afraid there's nothing we can promise you." "I ain't a skin for promises," she said. "Just justice." They left, muttering to each other as the door clicked shut. Imani sat back, shaking her head. She'd seen this before. The rich rewriting the story before the ink was dry. But not this time. A nurse stepped in, checking Ethan's vitals. "You should get some rest," she said softly. Imani smiled faintly. Rest comes after truth. A few hours later, a detective came by. Kind eyes, worn badge. He asked her to walk him through what happened. Imani told him everything. The warning, the collapse, the lies. Every detail. He listened quietly, then nodded. "You did the right thing," he said. "You might have saved his life." When he left, she looked at Ethan again, pale but breathing strong. Her voice was a whisper meant for him alone. "They tried to scare me quiet, sir, but I don't scare easy no more." She took his hand, her thumb brushing the band around his wrist. "For too long, truth's been something poor folks gotta whisper. But not today." Outside, the city buzzed on like nothing had happened. Inside that small hospital room, a black woman had just chosen courage over fear. And for the first time in years, she felt free. By the third day, Ethan's strength had begun to return, but so had his memories. He sat upright now, his skin no longer ghost pale, eyes clearer but heavy with truth. Imani sat beside him, quiet, folding his blanket the way she'd always done, but something between them had changed. It wasn't just gratitude. It was trust, the kind money couldn't buy. "I can't stay married to her," he said suddenly, voice low. Imani didn't look up. "You don't owe her another breath, sir." He nodded slowly. "My lawyer came this morning. I'm filing for divorce today." She said nothing, but the corner of her mouth twitched in quiet relief. "Do you want her punished?" she asked finally. Ethan shook his head. "No, I just want peace. I'll let her live with what she did." "That's punishment enough. A nurse peeked in. "Mr. Cole, your attorney's ready when you are." He nodded, then turned to Imani. "Will you come with me?" Her brow lifted. "You don't need me for that." "I do," he said simply. "You were there when my life fell apart. I want you there when I take it back." A few hours later, Ethan sat across from his wife in a quiet conference room. Madison wore black sunglasses, her face composed but her fingers trembling. Her lawyer spoke for her, spouting words like reputation settlement and mutual privacy. Ethan just stared at the woman he'd once believed was forever. When it was over, he stood and said one final thing. "You taught me something, Madison. That love without respect is just performance. I'm done performing." He walked out without looking back. Imani followed a few steps behind, her heart pounding with something close to justice. In the hallway, he stopped. "You ever think about leaving this place, starting fresh?" She blinked. "Every day. But bills don't care about dreams." He smiled faintly. "They will now. I'm transferring funds to your name, college for your brother, and whatever else you need." Her eyes widened. "Sir, I can't take that." "Yes, you can," he said softly. "Because you earned it, not for cleaning my house, but for saving my soul." Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you." Ethan nodded once. "No, thank you, Imani, for standing between me and ruin when no one else would." As they left the building, the sunlight hit their faces, bright, clean, and real. Justice didn't roar that day. It simply breathed. The following week, the morning sky over Atlanta was soft and golden. Ethan stood outside his mansion again, but this time, there were no lilies in his hand, no pain in his chest. The windows that once reflected lies now stood open, letting sunlight flood through rooms that had finally been aired out. Imani arrived quietly, holding a small paper bag with coffee and 2 biscuits. "Didn't think I'd ever step back in this place," she said with a faint smile. He smiled back. "Neither did I. But I guess healing starts where the hurt happened." They walked through the foyer together, the same space where she'd once fallen to her knees begging him not to go upstairs. Now, each step felt lighter, the silence less heavy. He stopped at the staircase, glancing up toward the bedroom that had once shattered his life. Then he looked at her. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's open these windows and let the ghost go." She nodded, following him up. Sunlight poured in through sheer curtains, dancing across the marble floors. Imani set the coffee down on the dresser and whispered, "You ever gonna sell this place?" He shook his head. "No, I'm gonna live in it honest this time." She smiled. "Then you already won." They stood there for a moment, side by side, a rich white man and the black woman who saved him, both changed, both humbled by truth. Ethan looked at her, voice quiet but sure. "You ever need anything, Imani, I'm a call away." She chuckled. "You already gave me what I needed, sir, a reason to keep believing good people still exist." He reached out, squeezed her hand once. "Then we're even." Outside, a breeze moved through the open windows, carrying away the last traces of that morning's pain. Imani closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a thank you no one else could hear. Justice, it seemed, didn't always shout. Sometimes it simply stayed. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.